I'm Jim Fisher of Fisher Compliance. I'd like to thank the Southern California Alliance of POTWs for inviting me to speak today on the new WDRs and gearing up. I've got some compliance best practices on the current order. Just to, again, be thinking about now before that new order is adopted. We have a draft. We don't have a final order yet. So in the interim, we're going to cover those. Number one, part two, gearing up for the new WDRs, what you might do, what it looks like, kind of trying to wrap your head around a little bit, and what you might do with your program to get ready for those WDRs when they're adopted. So really, these are all focusing around for the compliance, reducing violations, reducing audit risks, and SSMP best practices to really benchmark what you have right now. So, the water board's just paying attention to the compliance, and they just presented this on Tableau fairly recently. And here you can see here 245 systems here out of compliance for the monthly reporting, compliance, non-compliance. So this is definitely an area of concern for the draft WDRs. And I think we've covered that in previous trainings. These are the 17 areas I highly recommend looking at if you're doing an audit, if you're doing your SSMP update. These are really best practices from my point of view to really reducing those violations, being ready for an inspector, really making sure your SSMP is in great shape to get ready for that upgrade in the new order. So these areas here, don't forget about these. We have the 11 elements that are in the current order, but also implementation of the SSMP. This is what the inspectors are looking for. Training, SOPs, the notification, discharge, reporting, monitoring. These are things that are often not checked. These are definitely areas. I can show you how to do those here next couple slides. But you must measure the effectiveness for all the elements, not just the 11, but everything else in your program. So don't forget about those. So I'm going to show you real quickly how I recommend this as an SOP. This is something I'm using. I'm on the right here. This is right out of the US EPA's book, Compliance Inspection Manual. This is what the inspectors use. They have a 5-step process to do desktop review. They do an on-site inspection. They use all that for coming up with a final report. And that's what I use and recommend for doing. You can do the same thing with your program. Do what the inspector would do. Come up with a really good way to illustrate in your audits. Are you being effective? Yes or no. Are you compliant? Yes or no. And if you're not being effective or compliant, explaining those here, we have a very detailed way of explaining those step by step in an appendix, so that it's very clear what you're working on, what are the shortfalls, what's working well, what isn't working well. So also, here's another way. Don't forget to evaluate the notification and reporting. Again, this is not seen in a lot of the audits that I've looked at. I have actually a tool that will actually, with a click of a button, can pull up those in the issues here. Again, so you can use those for findings in your audit. So you're not ignoring number 13 through 16 basically here. You're looking at the reporting to see how you did, through the audit period or for the whole time during the program. So ultimately at the end, I come up with a dashboard that'll show, are there any violations of the order? Are there other areas of concern that are not really violations, but could be, if not addressed? You can see there are 14 in here for all those 17 elements across those. And 104 best practice recommendations. I think that's really the fruit of why we do these audits and should be used to the maximum benefit when you do upgrade your SSMP. So you're really improving your program. You're not just doing the audit, walking it through it, but you're using those 104 best practice recommendations or things you came up with in your audit to really streamline and enhance your program. That's definitely an area you can see in the draft. The water board's already tipping their hand, showing you they want to see those findings in the audits incorporated into the SSMP moving forward. So again, that's something I'm recommending, I'm doing. And don't forget about these other areas here. We have a guide for developing the SSMPs. This is on the SSO library. This is an excellent resource. It was developed by SCAP, by CASA, by Civiqua, CWA, others. Had a major hand in this, major players out there, best practice leaders. So that's definitely something you can lean on for your current program to really benchmark to see where you're at. I have some other trainings here this was done a year and a half ago for the last annual conference for CWA. That's up on YouTube. I'll have a link at the end, along with another one, again, on really what enforcement looks like. I mean, how are you going to avoid something if you don't even know what it looks like? So this walks through the entire process from, basically from informal to formal, and really, again, for those compliance managers, supervisors, LROs to really have a handle on how to avoid enforcement, what it looks like, and some case studies. So those are available. I have a link at the end. Now I'm going to jump into the gearing up for the new WDRs. This is an area that I really wanted to cover here in this training. The water boards posted these 9 reasons for changing the order. It's a lot to swallow. And if you haven't seen them, they're here on the water board's website under announcements. You can take a look. I've kind of tried to take a step back to maybe look overall at, what the current order looks like, 22 pages, and compare it to the new order that we have, that the draft order on the street here in 2022. It's 85 pages. It looks a lot like an NPDES permit because it is an NPDES template for general permits. And you can see here on the right, it's pretty beefy. And if you scroll down to their website here at the water boards, you'll see other general permits here on the right. And this is just one more in here that is basically this one here that's coming in here as a draft, if you want to get an idea what the other adopted ones look like. So I tried to take a look basically at like the SSMP. What's the differences here? Well, you got 11 elements over here on the current WDRs, and on the right you have basically 16. I couldn't even put them all up here. So there's quite a bit more. There's a few more areas I'll flag out here in a minute. I just overall looked at the comparison between the current order that we have now, the 23 pages, 2006, and the 2022. You can see there's a lot of differences here, a lot of additions, really. And I wanted to put those kind of at the bottom here. More or less, it's all these here, these 8 or 10 at the bottom here. But some of these are really important. The audits never had to be uploaded, so those are going to be transparent now, all available publicly. Risk assessment, resilience planning, expanded legal authority. And, at the bottom here, you've got this current industry practices. So really the board is tipping their hand to say, hey, not only should you be complying with the permit, but also industry best practices are something that I know they use these in enforcement. And it's definitely an expectation that the equipment, the technologies, the strategies you're employing, should be what the industry is recommending. So, and there's plenty out there. I think we know from the SSO library and from the earlier resources I showed with the SSP development guide. So there's things out there. Again, these are really the major things I recommend maybe taking a look at from this point of view. Again, this is a draft order. We don't have a final order. Could be a while, but really, this is kind of a snapshot of what the board is kind of leaning towards with this current draft. Another thing I looked at were the major compliance points. And this is, again, something inspectors check. I've been to well over 100 systems in my tenure at the board, and this is definitely an area that inspectors are really looking for these major compliance points. This is what they're trained to do. And basically, if you look at the differences here, there's quite a bit more. So you have 7 definitions, 33 over here. The findings, a lot more. Prohibitions, of course, there's 3 now instead of 2 in the draft. Specifications, provisions, these really are quite a bit of an upgrade here. And there's 16 elements again compared to 11. Again, something to really keep an eye on to get a better idea what the ask is here with this current draft. I'm going to be doing another presentation shortly on the enforcement components, what those might look like with the current draft WDRs compared to the differences in the 2006 compared to the 2022 draft, to help everybody kind of get a better idea what the enforcement might look like. So got a couple of other things I'm going to recommend here. I think for right now, a lot of the people I've talked with that are calling me say, hey, how can I get ready? I think there's really 5 things you can really do right now to get ready. And that starting with step 1, evaluating your current SSMP for compliance with the 2006 order. This is pretty straightforward. I have some tables and tools for doing this. But again, starting there, looking at your last audits, looking at your reporting in CWICs. Is it complete? With COVID-19 now, a lot of the inspectors, are probably doing virtual. They're doing desktop review. Everybody's doing more remote work. How do those look? If you go in there and look at yourself, does it look complete? Does it stand alone? Are there photos? Are there explanations for some of the larger spills, or all the spills for that matter? Or are you low-hanging fruit where they say, hey, go in there, hey, the reporting doesn't look good. I might want to look at their SSMP. If you go online and they can do that. Again, the more of this that looks better online, the better you're going to be able to showcase your program. So I would recommend those 3 steps. And training is another area of weakness that often gets dinged by an inspector. Evaluating yourself, or you have tailgates, or do you actually have training? You're documenting, who trained you, what was trained, the training content. That's the kind of thing inspectors are looking for. And last but not least, do step 5. Do the water board's pre-inspection questionnaire. I think all 5 of these are really the best practice in getting ready for the new WDRs, regardless of what they do. Even if they don't adopt anything, this is still a really good practice to really get in shape, start conditioning your work programs now, start looking at yourself a little bit more critically so that you're ready to go when that current order or is either upgraded or a new order is adopted, which is really what they're pushing for right now. So I think this is really the best practice in getting ready and moving forward. Some of the suggested improvements I came up with a couple. I like to see a little bit more transparency from the boards on kind of the reasoning and the changes, how the current order is working, what's not working in it, how it could be further improved on its own, and improving, the program, versus doing a new draft WDR. So I'd like to really see a little bit more on that. I'd like to see a little bit more transition period. I think everybody sees the current order, although it was brand new, the current order had a really good transition period. I think a couple years. Maybe it's not that long, but I think I'd like to see more than 60 days, I think is what I read in there now, to get in the new order and have it be implemented. So a transition period would be great to have, I think, along with biennial review of the WDRs so that the water boards, the public, the regional boards, everybody really is committed to measuring the effectiveness of the WDRs. Clearly, effectiveness is an area they keep saying we want effective permits. We need people to be effective with their sewer reduction program. Well, we want the order to be effective too. So I think I'm hearing this from a lot of people I'm helping is how come they can't do something in front of the board to really have some added transparency about the compliance, the ongoing enforcement cases, and really they used to do this 5-10 years ago every year or two, and I think this would be really good to have as a requirement in anything moving forward new. Along with some incentives for certification, I think would be great to have really an acknowledgement that certification works well. Their systems are a lot more committed. They're putting money at certification and time and effort. Really, that's a great thing, and we've seen that with enforcement actions, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area. They actually give discounts to systems that have more enforcement. So I think that's an area that could really be beefed up and continue to come in, along with an implementation committee. I think a committee would be great to have to really ensure that the order stays on track. A couple last ones here. Ongoing trainings by the board would be great also to really make sure that everybody kind of knows what the permit expectations are in a way that's useful and meaningful and can help people stay on track. They know what compliance looks like, etc. And the last thing would be streamline enforcement for the smaller spills. They're really 90+% of the spills in here are small, very small. And so really having a way to sort of fix it ticket or a way to really kind of get in there and say, hey, we acknowledge that we have these violations. We want to resolve these, get them off the books. I think that'd be a great thing to have as part of this current order if that were moving forward here. Highly recommended number 7 for streamline enforcement. Okay, so a couple of other things just to kind of mention at the end here. I've got a couple of other new trainings coming up here. One for legally responsible officials and best practices. I'm very excited to team up with Sam Rose Consulting and Rich Cunningham for this one here coming up here. We're going to be doing these statewide, along with SSMP dashboards and some more on the enforcement process. The LRO one coming up is going to be exciting. Sam's going to talk more about that and get in the weeds a little bit about what that's going to include. Regional Board Insights, how to stay in compliance, avoiding violations and risk for enforcement, getting ready for inspectors. Again, being resilient, updating your SSMPs, really showcasing some of those best practices that we can pass along to the LROs to really make sure they're competent and moving forward, regardless of what's adopted. So I just wanted to put a plug in too also for the annual conference, CWA. Excellent show. I can't wait to go. It's in person again. Everybody's excited. So that's coming up. I'm speaking on Thursday towards the end of the show here. and invite you to come to my presentation. I also have some presentations up on YouTube. There's about a dozen up there. Again, if you really want to dive in the weeds a little bit more about what you can do with your current program to really stay in compliance, what the enforcement looks like to really avoid it, and other best practices. So those are available on YouTube, along with on my website here at fishercompliance.com. So I really thank you for your time. I would recommend subscribing over here on my website. If you go there, scroll down, and stay apprised of any trainings, any have any questions, any help, let us know. We're available here on our website. So appreciate your time today, and I really thank Steve Jepson and SCAP again for inviting me. And I'll turn it over now to Sam Rose with Sam Rose Consulting. Thank you.